When Derek called me at 2 in the morning claiming he had lost his wallet, I wired $5,000 without a second thought. I never suspected that the very same wallet had actually been sitting in my late aunt's possession for 2 years, silently gathering evidence. Now, as the lawyer opens the final envelope, I realize that old leather wallet held the brutal truth that was about to cost my husband his reputation, his freedom, and his entire life. My name is Harper, 32 years old, and for the last decade, I have curated art for the sort of people who buy paintings to match their sofas. I have a trained eye for authenticity, for spotting the difference between a masterstroke and a cheap imitation. Yet, as I sat in my living room, nothing in the high-stakes art world could have prepared me for the masterclass in performance art I was currently witnessing from my own husband. I had just buried the only family I had left. Aunt Cordelia was gone. She was a legend in Chicago real estate, a woman who ate commercial developers for breakfast and negotiated skyscrapers over lunch. She went out the way she lived fast, unsentimental, and leaving a massive footprint. A stroke took her in less than 20 minutes, leaving behind a silence in my life that felt heavier than the steel and concrete empire she had built. Then there was Derek, my husband, the 35-year-old sales director at a virtual software company called Nebula Stream. Throughout the funeral, his grief was industrial grade. It was efficient. He cried at exactly the right moments, sighed at the appropriate volume, and held my hand just tight enough to look supportive to the onlookers, but I felt the difference. I saw his eyes darting to his Apple Watch every 5 minutes, checking notifications while the priest spoke about eternal rest. It was a performance, and he was waiting for the curtain call. The mask slipped exactly 48 hours after we put Cordelia in the ground. The flowers in the hallway hadn't even wilted when Derek stopped talking about poor Cordelia and started talking about us. Specifically, what we were going to do with her estate. He brought up the villa in Lake Forest over breakfast, suggesting we could flip it before the summer market cooled down. He used the word we with a possessiveness that made my skin crawl, as if her death was simply a business merger he had successfully closed. It wasn't just talk. The packages started arriving. I found receipts for Italian silk suits and handmade leather shoes. Then, the kicker. I found a deposit receipt for a Porsche 911 crumpled in his jacket pocket. We were supposed to be on a budget. Our joint savings were barely touching $20,000 after some bad investments he had made last year, yet he was spending like he had just won the Powerball. When I confronted him, he waved me off with a charming smile, claiming a big commission check was clearing next week. But his eyes didn't smile. They just calculated. It made me think of Cordelia. She was a woman of steel and intuition. From the moment I introduced her to Derek 5 years ago, her eyes had narrowed. She never said it outright. She was too classy for open warfare, but I felt her hesitation. She looked at him the way a seasoned appraiser looks at a forgery. The technique is there. The surface is shiny, but the soul is missing. She knew something I didn't, or perhaps something I refused to see. For the last week, Derek had been relentless. Every conversation circled back to the lawyer. "Have you called Prescott yet?" he would ask while knotting a tie that cost $600. "We need to get the tax paperwork settled. Harper, it is for your own protection." He framed his greed as administrative concern, but I could hear the hunger in his voice. The contrast between my genuine, hollowing grief and his vibrating, caffeinated anticipation was creating a fracture in the air between us. The call finally came on a Wednesday afternoon. It was from the offices of Prescott and Associates. The secretary sounded grave, her voice lacking the usual customer service warmth. She told me that Arthur Prescott himself would be reading the will this coming Friday morning. I started to say I would be there, but she interrupted me. She said Mr. Prescott had specific instructions. Derek had to be there too. His presence was not just requested, it was mandatory according to a special directive left by the deceased. When I told Derek, he didn't look solemn. He looked like a man who had just been handed the keys to the kingdom. He didn't know that the lock was about to change. Friday morning arrived with a sunrise that felt offensively bright. I watched Derek in the master bathroom, and the disconnect between the occasion and his demeanor made my stomach turn. He was not getting ready for a somber legal proceeding. He was grooming himself as if he were about to walk onto a stage to accept an award. He spent 20 minutes perfecting the wave in his hair, checking every angle in the mirror. Then came the cologne. He sprayed a heavy cloud of a scent that smelled of sandalwood and aggressive musk, something far too expensive for our current budget. He had told me once it was a gift from a grateful client, but today, as the mist settled on his tailored suit, he didn't smell like my husband. He smelled like a stranger trying to mask his own rot. I pulled on a simple black dress, the fabric cool and unforgiving against my skin. Standing next to him, I felt alien. He was vibrating with a manic electric energy, humming a tune under his breath while I felt hollowed out by the reality that the only person who truly knew me was gone. The drive into downtown Chicago was a masterclass in narcissism. The traffic on the I-90 was dense, a river of red taillights, but Derek didn't seem to notice the congestion. He gripped the steering wheel of our sedan, knuckles white not from stress, but from excitement. He talked nonstop, and not once did he mention Cordelia. He rambled about a tech startup in Silicon Valley that was looking for angel investors, throwing around buzzwords like disruptive synergy and scalable returns. Then, without taking a breath, he pivoted to vacations. He asked if I preferred the privacy of a villa in Bora Bora or the social scene of a chalet in the Swiss Alps. I stared out the window at the gray skyline, my silence absolute. But he didn't care. To him, I was just an audience member for his victory speech. We arrived at the tower where Prescott and Associates occupied the entire top floor. The elevator ride was swift, depositing us into a lobby that smelled of old money, leather, and intimidation. The walls were paneled in dark oak, and the furniture was upholstered in a deep burgundy leather that looked like it could absorb sound and light. It was a place designed to make you feel small, to remind you that the law was a heavy, crushing weight, not a friend. We were ushered into a massive conference room that overlooked the lake, a vast expanse of blue that looked deceptively calm. But it wasn't the view that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. It was the two men standing in the far corners of the room. They were large, wearing ill-fitting suits that strained at the shoulders, their hands clasped in front of them in a pose of practiced stillness. Bodyguards. Why would a standard reading of a will require security? A knot of anxiety tightened in my chest. But Derek strode past them without a second glance, too busy adjusting his cuffs to notice the threat in the room. Arthur Prescott entered a moment later. He was a man in his early 60s who moved with the precision of a scalpel. He wore a charcoal suit and gold-rimmed glasses that hid eyes as cold as the lake outside. He didn't offer a handshake. Instead, he took his seat at the head of the long mahogany table and opened a thick file. He looked at me with a brief, almost imperceptible nod of sympathy. And then his gaze shifted to Derek. It was a look of profound distaste, the way one might look at a cockroach that had scuttled across a pristine dinner plate, something that didn't belong and needed to be removed. Mr. Prescott began with the standard formalities, offering condolences that sounded polite but rehearsed. He spoke of Aunt Cordelia's legacy and her impact on the city. Beside me, Derek was physically incapable of sitting still. His leg was bouncing up and down under the table, a rapid staccato rhythm that shook the floorboards. He was nodding along, feigning solemnity, but his lips were twitching, fighting back a smile that wanted to devour the room. Finally, Derek could not take the waiting any longer. He cleared his throat, interrupting Mr. Prescott in the middle of a sentence about charitable bequests. Derek leaned forward, resting his elbows on the polished wood, and asked the question that had been burning a hole in his tongue all morning. He wanted to know the bottom line. He asked what the total valuation of the liquid assets was, claiming we needed to know immediately for tax planning purposes. The rudeness of the interruption hung in the air like a foul odor. Mr. Prescott stopped shuffling his papers. He looked up slowly, peering over the rim of his glasses. A corner of his mouth lifted, not in a smile, but in a sneer of pure, unfiltered contempt. Mr. Prescott adjusted his glasses and began to read from the document with a monotone delivery that betrayed nothing of the bomb he was about to drop. He listed the assets with clinical precision: the brownstones in the Gold Coast, the commercial strip in the Loop, the diversified stock portfolio, and the liquid cash reserves. When he tallied the final sum, the number hung in the air like a physical weight: $12 million. Beside me, Derek stopped breathing for a second. Then, his hand shot out and clamped over mine under the table. His grip was not affectionate, it was crushing. He leaned in close, his breath hot against my ear, and whispered 3 words that chilled me to the bone. "We are rich." I turned to look at him. His eyes were wide, the pupils dilated, glowing with a terrifying, avaricious light. He was not looking at me, he was looking through me, envisioning a future where he was the king of a kingdom he had not built. But the celebration was premature. Mr. Prescott did not close the folder. Instead, he looked up, his expression hardening. He stated clearly that there was a condition, a specific addendum clause that had to be addressed before a single cent could be transferred or any titles signed over. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Derek's smile faltered, his grip on my hand loosening slightly as confusion replaced his greed. From beneath the desk, the lawyer produced a small, battered wooden box. He placed it in the center of the polished table with a deliberate thud. He did not speak immediately. He reached inside and pulled out a single object. It was not a legal document. It was not a key. It was a man's leather wallet, the brown hide worn and cracked at the spine, the edges fraying from years of use. I felt Derek stiffen beside me. The color drained from his face so fast it was as if someone had pulled a plug. In a heartbeat, his complexion went from a flush of excitement to the gray of wet ash. I stared at the object, and recognition washed over me like a wave of nausea. I knew that wallet. I had bought it for him for our first anniversary, but more importantly, I remembered the story of its disappearance. My mind snapped back 2 years. It was a Tuesday, 2 in the morning. The phone had rung, shrill and demanding in the dark. I answered to hear Derek's voice, high-pitched and bordering on hysteria. He told me he was at a bar called the Velvet Lounge with some potential investors. He claimed disaster had struck. He said he had been pickpocketed in the chaos of the crowd. His ID, his credit cards, his cash all gone. He begged me to help him. He said the bar was demanding payment for the tab and threatening to call the police. But since his cards were gone, he needed me to wire $5,000 to a third-party account immediately to settle the bill and a so-called trouble fee to keep things quiet. I had been so worried. I was the dutiful wife. I got out of bed, logged into our banking app, and transferred the money without asking a single question. He came home hours later, disheveled and apologetic. He spent the next week canceling cards and standing in line at the DMV to replace his license. He never spoke of that night again, and I never pressed him, but here was the wallet, sitting on the table of my dead aunt's lawyer. It looked heavy, bloated even, as if it was holding secrets that were desperate to get out. Mr. Prescott's voice cut through the silence, sharp as a whip. He looked directly at my husband, his eyes devoid of any professional courtesy. He asked if Mr. Mercer recognized the object. He paused, letting the silence stretch until it was agonizing before delivering the final strike. He asked if Derek was still sticking to the story that this wallet had been stolen 2 years ago at the Velvet Lounge. The name of the bar hung in the air, no longer a memory of a bad night, but the opening line of an indictment. That is incredible, Derek stammered, his voice cracking mid-sentence. He tried to muster a look of relieved surprise, but the performance was falling apart at the seams. Someone must have found it and turned it in. I guess there are still honest people in this city. Right, I mean. It has been 2 years. He let out a dry, nervous chuckle that sounded more like a cough. Despite the air-conditioned chill of the office, a single traitorous bead of sweat broke free from his hairline and traced a path down his temple. Mr. Prescott ignored him entirely. With deliberate, agonizing slowness, he unbuttoned the clasp of the wallet. He did not pull out cash. Instead, he extracted a thick, folded wedge of papers and a sleek, plastic key card. He laid them out on the mahogany table like a blackjack dealer revealing a winning hand. Ms. Cordelia did not find this wallet. Harper, Mr. Prescott said, his eyes locking onto mine, ensuring I heard every syllable. She removed it from the inside pocket of Mr. Mercer's suit jacket, the jacket he left draped over a chair in her foyer at noon the day after he claimed it was stolen. The room seemed to tilt. He was at her house, I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He was, Prescott confirmed. He went there to solicit a personal loan from her, a request she denied. In his anger and haste to leave, he forgot his jacket. By the time he called to retrieve it, she had already looked inside. I looked at Derek. He was staring at the table, his jaw clenched so hard I could see the muscles spasming. The lie about the mugging, the frantic phone call at 2 a.m, the $5,000 I had wired, it was all a smokescreen. But why? If he had just left his wallet at my aunt's house. Why invent a felony theft? Prescott answered the question before I could ask it. He tapped a manicured finger on the receipts. He could not admit he had the wallet. Harper, because of what was inside it, these are not receipts for business dinners or client entertainment. These are billing statements from the Serenity Private Maternity Clinic. He picked up the plastic card. And this is a permanent access key for a luxury residential suite in the River North District. My breath caught in my throat. Maternity clinic. Apartment key. Your aunt did not return the wallet, Prescott continued, his voice dropping an octave, becoming a hammer of judgment. She kept it, and she used these receipts as the starting point for a private investigation that lasted exactly 2 years. That is illegal. Derek shot up from his chair, knocking it backward. His face was a mask of furious red. You have no right. That is an invasion of privacy. I will sue this entire firm for. He did not finish the threat. The 2 silent sentinels in the corners moved. They did not run. They simply stepped forward, closing the space with terrifying speed. One of them placed a hand on Derek's shoulder. It was not a shove. Just a heavy, immovable pressure that said sit down or be put down. Derek looked at the guard, then at me, and crumbled back into his seat, defeated by physical force but still defiant in his eyes. Prescott waited for the shuffling to stop before opening a blue folder marked Exhibit A. Investigation Report Number 1, the lawyer read, his tone dry and factual, stripping the affair of any romance and leaving only the sordid details. Subject Derek Mercer. Associate Bianca Moretti, former front desk receptionist at Nebula Stream. Duration of relationship verified 3 years. 3 years? The words hung in the air like smoke. My husband had not just made a mistake. He had been living a double life since before my aunt even got sick. Mr. Prescott dimmed the lights, and a screen descended from the ceiling with a soft mechanical whir. It was time for the financial autopsy. He clicked a remote, and a spreadsheet appeared, illuminated in high definition. It was a forensic reconstruction of our bank accounts over the last 36 months. You believed you were investing in your future, Harper, Prescott said, his voice devoid of emotion. You authorized transfers to accounts labeled Vanguard Growth and Future Roth, but those accounts do not exist. He clicked to the next slide. It showed a web of transfers, the money I had saved for the kitchen renovation, The emergency fund we had built for a rainy day, it was all there, bleeding out in streams of red. That night, 2 years ago, Prescott continued, pointing to a specific line item. The $5,000 you wired to save your husband from the fictional thugs at the Velvet Lounge. That money was indeed a payment, but not to a bar. It was a 50% deposit for a cosmetic surgery clinic in Highland Park. Ms. Moretti wanted a new nose, and you paid for it. I felt a physical blow to my chest, but I did not gasp. I sat frozen, watching the screen as Prescott unveiled the next layer of betrayal. He pulled up a credit card statement. It was a black card issued in my name, one I had never applied for. Derek had forged my signature. The statement was a roadmap of their affair. Weekend trips to Miami listed as business conferences. A suite at the Bellagio in Las Vegas during a week he claimed to be at a software expo in Seattle. The total misappropriation of marital assets, Prescott summarized, stands at exactly $200,000. $200,000. My savings, my hard work, gone. I sat in silence. I expected to feel tears pricking at my eyes, but there was nothing, no sadness, no grief. Instead, a cold, jagged anger began to crystallize along my spine. I looked at the screen, where Prescott had projected a photograph taken from social media. It showed Derek and a blonde woman, Bianca. I assumed laughing on the deck of a yacht, holding champagne flutes. They looked happy. They looked rich. They looked like they were spending my money. And finally, Prescott said, looking down at my hand resting on the table, the ring. I looked down at the solitaire diamond Derek had given me for our 5th anniversary. He had told me it was a family heirloom left to him by his mother. He said it was priceless. That stone is high-grade cubic zirconia, Prescott said flatly. Value approximately $80. The receipts show that on the same day he gave you that, he purchased a 2-carat flawless diamond solitaire from Tiffany & Co. using your joint checking account. That ring is currently residing on the left hand of Ms. Moretti. Derek flinched as if he had been slapped. He opened his mouth to speak, perhaps to spin another impossible lie, but Prescott raised a hand to silence him. We also recovered text messages from the cloud backup on the phone you used to pay for the Uber rides to Ms. Moretti's apartment. Prescott picked up a sheet of paper and began to read. Sent 3 weeks ago. The old hag Cordelia is almost dead. Just wait a little longer, babe. I will take the idiot Harper's money, and we will vanish from this dump. The words hung in the air, vibrating with malice. The idiot Harper. That phrase hit me harder than the theft, harder than the infidelity. It shattered the last fragile remnant of the man I thought I had married. The husband I knew was dead. The man sitting next to me was a parasite, and for the first time in 10 years, I saw him clearly. Ms. Cordelia was a thorough woman, Mr. Prescott said, closing the folder on the affair and opening a new one. This one stamped with the logo of a private forensic accounting firm. She knew that a man who lies to his wife about his heart will usually lie about his wallet too. So, naturally, she looked into his standing at Nebula Stream. Derek slumped in his chair. The defiance that had held him upright moments ago was gone, replaced by the hollow, terrified look of a man watching a tsunami approach from the shoreline. According to your husband, Harper, he is the regional sales director, a top performer bringing in record commissions. Prescott continued, his voice precise and cutting, peeling back the layers of my reality. However, according to the official records from the Human Resources Department at Nebula Stream, Mr. Mercer was terminated with cause exactly 6 months ago. I stared at the side of Derek's face. 6 months. For half a year. He had put on a suit every morning, kissed me goodbye, grabbed his coffee, and walked out the door with the purpose of a busy executive. He was fired for systematic expense account fraud, Prescott explained, not looking up from his notes. He was billing the company for client dinners that never happened and pocketing the difference. Since his termination, he has maintained his daily charade. He leaves your house at 7 in the morning. He drives directly to the apartment of Ms. Moretti in River North, and there, while you are at work earning a living, he spends his days playing video games and ordering delivery food on your credit card. "But the money," I whispered, my mind racing to make the math work, trying to reconcile the lie with the bank alerts. He brought home a bonus check last month. $10,000. If he is unemployed, where did that come from? Prescott sighed, a sound of genuine professional pity. That is the most dangerous part of the lie. Harper. When the salary stopped, Mr. Mercer did not cut back on his lifestyle. He went to the secondary lending market. Or, to be more precise, he went to loan sharks. He slid a document across the polished table. It was a high-interest loan agreement from a company called Swift Capital Solutions, a name that sounded legitimate but smelled of predatory rates and broken kneecaps. He borrowed $50,000 at 40% interest, Prescott stated. And since he has no income and no personal credit worth speaking of, he needed collateral. He used the only asset of significant value he had access to. Your home. My blood ran cold. The house. It was in both our names. This is a notice of default, Prescott said, holding up a red-enveloped letter that looked crinkled, as if it had been shoved hastily into a pocket. It was delivered to your mailbox this morning at 8. Mr. Mercer intercepted it before you woke up and hid it in his briefcase before coming here. If the arrears are not cleared within 30 days, the bank will begin foreclosure proceedings. I looked at the letter, then at Derek. The betrayal had mutated. It was not just about sex or emotional cruelty anymore. He had endangered my very survival. He had risked the roof over my head, the sanctuary I had worked so hard to maintain, just to fund his sloth and his mistress. Something inside me snapped. It was not a loud break, but a quiet, permanent severing of ties. The sadness evaporated, replaced by a clarity that was sharp, cold, and terrifying. I looked at the man shivering in the expensive suit I had paid for, and I did not see a husband who had lost his way. I saw a parasite. I saw an enemy combatant who had invaded my life and was trying to burn it down from the inside. Derek saw the shift in my eyes. The panic finally overtook him. He turned to me, his hands shaking violently as he reached out, trying to grab my arm, his palms sweating. "Harper, please, you have to understand," he stammered, his voice rising in a pathetic, mewling whine. The pressure was too much. The quota. They were drowning me. I just needed a break. I was going to pay it back. I swear it was just a temporary fix. I love you. Do not let them do this to me. It was just a mistake. He was begging, blaming the world, blaming the job he had already lost, blaming everything except his own greed. But his pleas sounded like static noise from a radio station that was slowly fading out of range. I was no longer listening to his excuses. I was calculating how to destroy him. "Mr. Mercer, the performance is far from concluded." Mr. Prescott interrupted, his voice cutting through Derek's blubbering like a hot knife through rancid butter. The lawyer offered a smile that was not an expression of joy, but a baring of teeth. "In fact, we are just reaching the most interesting act." He reached into his leather briefcase and produced yet another file, this one thinner, bound in black. He slid it across the table with a casual flick of his wrist. "Your late Aunt Cordelia was a woman who detested loose ends," Prescott explained, looking at me with a strange mixture of pride and sorrow. "When she discovered the high-interest loan you took out with Swift Capital Solutions, she did not report you. She did something far more pragmatic. She contacted the lending agency and purchased the debt in full through a shell corporation she established named Nemesis Holdings." I blinked, processing the information. Derek stopped his sniveling for a fraction of a second, his mouth hanging open. "What does that mean?" Derek whispered, his voice trembling. "It means," Prescott said, leaning forward, "that you no longer owe $50,000 plus interest to a gang of loan sharks. You owe it to the estate of Cordelia Vance, which means, effectively, you owe it to Harper." Derek's eyes widened, darting between me and the lawyer. "The terms of the will are explicit," Prescott continued, tapping a specific paragraph on the document. "The beneficiary, Harper Mercer, has the sole discretion to either extend the repayment terms or demand immediate, full enforcement of the debt, effective this very second." The gravity of the situation finally collapsed onto Derek's shoulders. He did not just sit there. He slid out of his chair and sank to the floor. It was a display of abject humiliation that was painful to watch. He crawled toward me on his hands and knees, dragging his expensive suit across the carpet. He reached out and clutched the hem of my black dress, his knuckles white, his face wet with tears and snot. "Harper, baby, please," he wailed, his voice cracking into a high-pitched sob. "You cannot do this. We have 10 years together, 10 years of love. I will fix it. I will get a job tomorrow. I will scrub floors if I have to. Just give me a chance to make it right." I looked down at him. He looked like a child who had broken a vase, not a grown man who had destroyed a life. "Think about our future," he pleaded, squeezing my leg through the fabric of my dress. "We were going to have a baby. Remember, we can still have that. I want to build a family with you. I want to be the father of your children. Do not throw away our family for a mistake." He was using children we did not have, children he had actively prevented us from having as a bargaining chip. It was a manipulation so vile it made my stomach churn. "Touching," Prescott remarked, his voice dry as dust. He picked up a small, silver digital recorder from the table. "However, before Mrs. Mercer makes her decision regarding the debt, there is one final piece of evidence she needs to hear. This audio was captured by a listening device installed in the dashboard of your Audi Q5 exactly 7 days ago." He pressed the play button. The quality was crystal clear, the sound of a car engine humming, the blinker clicking, and then Derek's voice, arrogant and loud. "The old hag is holding on too long." Derek's recorded voice sneered. "But once the money hits the account, I am done. I cannot stand looking at Harper's face anymore. Maybe I will slip her an overdose of sleeping pills, or maybe the brakes on her car will just fail. Either way, I am taking the cash and we are gone." The recording clicked off. The silence that followed was total. It was heavier than the air in a tomb. Derek froze. His hands, which had been clutching my dress, went limp and slid away. He did not look up. He stayed on his knees, staring at the floor, knowing that the bridge back to humanity had just been incinerated. I looked at the top of his head, at the perfectly styled hair he had groomed this morning. I felt the last drop of warmth leave my body. He had not just stolen my money. He had planned to take my life. He was not a husband. He was not even a man. He was a creature that needed to be exterminated. I stood up. The movement was slow, deliberate, and absolute. Derek was still kneeling, his fingers clutching the hem of my dress, his grip damp and desperate. I looked down at his hands I used to hold for comfort, and felt my skin crawl. With a swift, sharp motion, I reached down and peeled his fingers off the fabric. One by one, I brushed the spot where he had touched me vigorously, as if a cockroach had just skittered across my skirt, leaving behind a trail of invisible filth. I stepped back, creating a physical chasm between us that was far wider than the few feet of carpet. He looked up at me, his eyes rimmed with red, searching my face for the soft-hearted woman he had manipulated for a decade. He was looking for the wife who forgave, the wife who compromised, but she was not in the room. I looked straight into his eyes and found the space where my love used to be was now filled with a profound, nauseating disgust. There was no anger left to burn. There was only the icy clarity of indifference. He wasn't a monster. Monsters have power and presence. He was just a pathetic small man who had overplayed a weak hand and was now shocked that the house had won. I turned my back on him, dismissing his existence, and faced Mr. Prescott. My voice was steady, void of any tremor. Did my aunt leave specific instructions for this exact scenario? Mr. Prescott did not smile, but the corner of his eye crinkled with grim approval. She anticipated this moment down to the second. He replied. He opened a pristine leather folder and slid a stack of documents across the polished mahogany. These are prepared for your signature. An uncontested divorce petition, citing irrefutable proof of adultery and gross financial malfeasance. It is accompanied by a restraining order, effective immediately upon execution, barring Mr. Mercer from coming within 500 feet of you, your residence, or any property owned by the estate. And the other matter? I asked. Prescott nodded and pulled out a smaller, brightly colored envelope. The care package for Ms. Moretti. It is currently with a courier, scheduled for delivery to her apartment in 30 minutes. Inside is a dossier proving that while Mr. Mercer was claiming to be with her, he was actually spending his Tuesday nights with a 20-year-old marketing intern named Chloe. A sharp intake of breath came from the floor. Derek's head snapped up, his jaw dropping. The web of lies was so dense he had strangled himself in it. He wasn't just cheating on me, he was cheating on his mistress. He was pathological. He was incapable of honesty, treating women like interchangeable accessories to his ego. The revelation stripped away the last shred of tragedy from his situation and left only farce. He wasn't a tortured soul torn between two loves. He was just a greedy child who wanted all the toys. I picked up the heavy fountain pen from the desk. It felt cool and solid in my hand. A weapon of ink and law. I didn't hesitate. I didn't look back at the years we spent together or the memories we shared. I signed my name on the decree with such force that the nib tore through the paper on the final stroke, a jagged line finalizing the end of an era. It felt like signing a Declaration of Independence. I tossed the pen down, the clatter echoing in the silent room, and turned to face the man on the floor one last time. "You want money, Derek?" I asked, my voice cutting through the air like a guillotine. He stared at me, mute and terrified. "Fine. Let's do the math," I said, towering over him. "I will deduct the $200,000 you embezzled from our joint accounts and the kitchen fund from the total debt you now owe my aunt's estate." I leaned in closer, ensuring he heard every syllable of his ruin. By my calculation, with the compounding interest on the loans my aunt bought and the penalties for the mortgage fraud, you still owe me $500,000, and I expect to be paid. I straightened up, looking at him with the cold detachment of a stranger. "Good luck paying that back as an unemployed man." Mr. Prescott was not finished. He tapped the leather wallet sitting in the center of the table as if it were a radioactive isotope. He informed Derek that the wallet contained more than just receipts for a mistress. Tucked inside a hidden fold was a crumpled pawnshop ticket and a fabricated police report for a Rolex watch Derek had claimed was stolen during the same fictional mugging. He had filed an insurance claim for $15,000 based on that lie. Mr. Prescott looked at Derek with the detached calm of an executioner and explained that because he had uncovered clear evidence of bank fraud, forgery, and federal insurance fraud, his firm had a legal and ethical obligation to report these findings to the authorities immediately. As if on cue, a sound began to bleed through the thick, soundproof glass of the skyscraper. It was the wail of sirens. They were distant at first, rising from the canyon of the Chicago streets below, but they were getting louder with every second. Mr. Prescott checked his watch and noted casually that he had placed the call exactly 15 minutes ago. The realization hit Derek like a physical blow. The blood drained from his face, leaving it the color of old parchment. Panic, raw and primal, took over. He scrambled to his feet, his chair crashing backward onto the floor. He looked at the heavy oak door, the only exit, and he made his move. He lunged toward it, desperation fueling his steps, but he never made it past the threshold. The two bodyguards, who had been statues in the corner for the last hour, moved with terrifying speed. One of them stepped into Derek's path, blocking him like a concrete wall. Before Derek could even raise his hands, the guard spun him around and slammed him face first against the mahogany paneling. I heard the air leave Derek's lungs in a sharp grunt. His arms were wrenched behind his back, and the cold, metallic click of handcuffs echoed through the silent office. Pinned against the wall, helpless and trapped, the polished executive facade finally dissolved completely. Derek began to scream. He twisted his neck, his face contorted into a mask of pure, ugly rage. He did not beg for mercy this time. He spat the words at me. He called me cruel. He called me a cold-blooded bitch. He swore at me with the vocabulary of a street thug, his voice cracking with venom. This was not the charming man I had married. This was the real Derek, the one who had been hiding behind Italian suits and false smiles, a cornered animal lashing out. Then a vibration buzzed against the table. It was Derek's phone, which he had left behind in his scramble. Mr. Prescott reached out and, with a look of distaste, pressed the answer button and switched it to speaker. The voice that filled the room was shrill and hysterical. It was Bianca. She was not calling to check on him. She was screaming. She had just received the package from the courier, but she had also discovered something else. She shrieked that her jewelry box was empty. She had found the pawn ticket copy in the dossier. Derek had not just been spending my money. He had stolen her grandmother's emerald necklace to pay the interest on his loan shark debt. She screamed that she was calling the police, that she hoped he rotted in hell. Mr. Prescott ended the call with a tap of his finger. The room fell silent, save for Derek's ragged breathing against the wall. Every mask he wore had been stripped away. The devoted husband, the successful businessman, the loving lover, all gone. All that remained was a liar, a thief, and a fraud, exposed and shivering in the middle of a multi-million-dollar office. I looked at him, pinned there by the weight of his own choices. I waited for the pain to hit me, but it never came. Instead, I felt a sudden, profound lightness. It was the sensation of a heavy, malignant tumor being surgically removed from my body. The toxic hope I had held onto was gone, replaced by the clean air of freedom. I walked over to him. I did not get too close. I stood just out of range of his spit. "You are right about one thing, Derek," I said, my voice steady and clear. "You did not lose your wallet that night." He looked up at me, his eyes wide with fear and hate. "You lost your entire life," I told him. "And thank you for letting my aunt find it." The heavy double doors swung open with a force that rattled the frames, and 3 uniformed officers from the Chicago Police Department stepped into the room. They did not look like they were there for a social call. Mr. Prescott had timed their arrival with the precision of a Swiss watch. One officer stepped forward, reading from a warrant that sounded like a eulogy for Derek's freedom. He announced that Derek Mercer was under arrest for felony credit fraud, aggravated identity theft, forgery of legal documents, and conspiracy to commit grievous bodily harm. Derek did not go quietly. As the officer jerked his arms back to secure the cuffs, Derek let out a sound that was half sob, half scream. He was hauled up from the floor, his knees buckling, his expensive shoes scuffing uselessly against the carpet. They dragged him out of the conference room not like a white-collar criminal, but like common trash. Through the open doors, I could see the entire staff of the law firm standing in the hallway, paralegals, secretaries, and junior associates had stopped their work to watch. They stood in silence, their eyes tracking the man who had walked in like a king and was now leaving like a prisoner. Derek tried to hide his face against his shoulder, but there was nowhere to hide. When the elevator doors finally slid shut, cutting off his wailing protests, the silence that returned to the room was exquisite. Mr. Prescott turned to me. The hard edge in his eyes had softened into something resembling respect. He reached into his desk drawer and slid 2 items across the mahogany surface. The first was a set of heavy brass keys. The second was a black titanium American Express card. "Your aunt left specific instructions for this moment," Prescott said, his voice warm. "She said that once the trash has been taken out, you should go shopping. She also strongly suggested you change the locks on the Lake Forest villa immediately." I took the keys and the card. They felt cool and heavy in my hand, tangible proof of my new reality. Then, my eyes fell on the object remaining on the table, the old leather wallet, the thing that had started it all. It looked pathetic now, just a piece of cracked cowhide that had held so many lies. I picked it up. It felt light, emptied of its destructive power. I walked over to the chrome wastebasket in the corner of the room and dropped it in. It hit the bottom with a hollow, metallic clang. That sound was the period at the end of a sentence that had dragged on for 10 years. "One last thing," Prescott said as I gathered my purse. "I have just executed the Scorched Earth Protocol as per Ms. Cordelia's final addendum." I raised an eyebrow. "What does that entail?" "My server has just automatically sent a digital copy of the entire investigation dossier, the photos, the bank statements, and the audio recording of him planning to harm you to every contact in Mr. Mercer's digital address book," Prescott explained with a grim sense of satisfaction. "That includes his former colleagues at Nebula Stream, his college fraternity brothers, and his parents back in Ohio. By the time he is processed at the station, he will not just be a criminal, he will be a pariah. There is no door in this country that will open for him again." I walked out of the skyscraper and stepped onto the sidewalk. The wind coming off Lake Michigan was fierce, whipping my hair around my face, but for the first time in forever, it didn't feel cold. It felt like a baptism. I could hear the siren of the police cruiser fading into the distance, carrying away the debris of my past life. I didn't turn my head to look. He was no longer my problem. I pulled out my phone. I tapped the screen 3 times, blocking Derek's number, then blocking his parents, and finally blocking his sister. Then, I dialed a number I had looked up years ago but never had the courage to call. Elite Travel Concierge. The voice on the other end answered. "How may we assist you?" "I need a one-way ticket to the Amalfi Coast," I said, my voice steady and commanding. "First class, and book the villa with the private pool. The one with no reception." I signaled for a taxi. As I slid into the back seat, a beam of sunlight cut through the Chicago clouds and hit my face. I caught my reflection in the rearview mirror. The tired, anxious wife who counted pennies and worried about a lying husband was gone. Staring back at me was a woman who was free, wealthy, and dangerous enough to survive anything. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from, so please leave a comment below and share your thoughts on Derek's karma. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to the Lily Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and hit that hype button to help us share these stories with more people.